We are very excited to announce a new free ICSA webinar series on SMGA recovery. This series is specifically for second and multi-generational adult former cult members. However, this is going to be the first program for SMGAs that is open to all. In the past, ICSA workshops for this population have been limited to those who were themselves born or raised in cults. But we see the increasing need for mental health professionals, educators, academics, researchers, and others to understand the vast needs of second and multi-generational adult former cult members in their journeys in recovery. My name is Ashlyn Hilliard, and I work for the International Cultic Studies Association. I am now very excited to introduce our second speaker in this recovery series, Eva Mackey. She will present on the impact of cults on childhood development. Eva Mackey, MD, is a second-generation adult former cult member. Her mother became a devotee of an Indian guru in 1975 when she was 1 year old. This particular guru taught a branch of Hinduism, particularly a non-dualistic philosophy which teaches that the self is one with the ultimate truth or reality. Half of her childhood was spent in the ashrams in India, where she and the other children were unsupervised much of the time. Despite the upheavals and instability that characterized her childhood, Eva managed to get out of the cult at the age of 16 and eventually earned her MD from the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. Today, Dr. Mackey has a busy practice, and she lives near Dallas with her husband and 4 children. Thank you so much, Eva, for being here today.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Eva Mackey, and I'm a healthcare professional. And I'm very excited to be here with you today. I'm very excited about this webinar series. This is a series to help those who were born and raised in cults. There's not a whole lot of resources out there for individuals who were raised in cults. So I think this is a really valuable program. And thank you so much for being with me. And I have a lot to talk about. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I actually have a PowerPoint presentation for you, and I am going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you today about the impact of cults on child development. This is a topic very pertinent to second and multi-generational former cult members. First of all, a little bit about who I am. Let's see, I don't think you can see all the text. There we go. Let me move that. So I am a second generation adult former cult member. My mother met a Hindu guru when I was 1 year old, and she became his devotee. And I was raised in his ashram in South India. And this is me as a child, maybe 5 years old. I was at, you can see a cow back here and tons of hay. I was at the cow shed. That's what they told us to do when I was a child in the cult, that when the adults were busy with their spiritual work, they would tell us kids to go play with the cows. So we spent a whole lot of time in this cow shed. So I'm speaking from my experience. I'm speaking from what I know as a healthcare professional, and also from my own experiences as a second generation adult former cult member. The first thing I want to talk about is attachment and attachment styles. Attachment is something that begins in infancy, and it's very important for shaping who we are and our relationships later on in life. Attachment is that special emotional relationship that involves an exchange of comfort, care, and pleasure. And it creates lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. Attachment styles develop very early in infancy through the relationship with the parent and caregiver. We are programmed as children to attach to our caregivers, and our caregiver's attachment style affects us and how we develop and the attachment style that we develop. And we learn about relationships through these early attachments to our caregivers. And the way that we attach to our caregiver is going to determine how we attach to other people, romantic partners and friends later on in life. The attachment patterns of the caregiver really impact the child, and the child develops strategies to deal with the parent's attachment style. And if the caregiver is healthy, then it creates a healthy bond. But when the caregiver has pathological attachment styles, then the child has to have a technique for dealing with that, which is the child's way to survive, but it may not be helpful later on in life when unhealthy patterns are learned. Let's talk about secure attachment first. So babies are born programmed to seek secure attachment to the caregiver. It's a survival skill. It's something they do for the sake of survival. So the first thing a baby does when it's born is it cries. And that is intended to engage the caregiver. So the caregiver turns to the child and takes care of the child. And then very early on, babies learn to smile at their caregiver. And the caregiver responds to that as well, smiles back. So it elicits a response in the caregiver. Secure attachment in childhood supports an individual's emotional and social development throughout life. And it's the mechanism by which we learn to feel seen, safe, and soothed. Seen because others hear us, see us, understand what we need. Safe because our caregiver is able to respond to that. And soothed because we get comfort out of getting our needs met. And let me talk about the ABCs of secure attachment. So the ABCs are attunement, balance, and coherence. First of all, attunement. What is attunement? This is the mechanism by which a child feels seen or understood. This is when a caregiver is able to appropriately respond to a child's needs. For example, a hungry baby will cry, and the caregiver is in tune with what's going on with the child and knows that it's time to feed the child. They know when their baby is likely to be sleepy and needs a nap. So the parent is able to align his or her internal state with that of the child through verbal and nonverbal means of communication. So as the child gets older, say a toddler, and toddler gets angry and throws a fit, mom or dad reflects that back to the child by saying, "I see that you're angry." And then they explore together, they're able to explore, what are you angry about? Well, mom or dad having that response to a child in that situation helps the child to understand their own emotions. So in attunement, so the caregiver responds appropriately to the child's needs, and the child's needs are met, and the child feels understood. Through attunement, the child finds physical, emotional, and mental balance. And they also learn how to self-regulate, how to self-calm, how to, they learn self-soothing. And they develop a sense of coherence. Through attunement and balance, a child is allowed to develop an internally integrated sense of self, and it fosters mental well-being. And child also learns how to feel interpersonally connected to others. That's their sense of, they feel bonded to others, connected to others. And normal childhood development is impacted both by nature and nurture. So, to some extent, the way a child grows and develops and the kind of personality and attachment styles, so there is a genetic component to that, but the attachment style of the parent and the environment that the child is raised in is huge. So for those of us raised in cults, we obviously we were raised in an unhealthy environment and are likely to have experienced a pathological attachment style. Our parents may not have been attuned to our needs because they were not allowed to by the cult leader. You know, they might have been told by the cult leader not to respond to a crying child. I mean, some of the cults, particularly some of the Christian cults, can be really really harsh on children, you know, and crying children are disciplined rather than having their needs responded to. So our parents, for the most part, were so invested in the cult that they were not able to be attuned to our needs, and we may not have learned the balance and the coherence that we were supposed to. So, okay, I think I skipped a slide here. Let me go back to our, okay, nature and nurture. Okay, normal childhood development. These are the capacities that we're supposed to be learning in early childhood development. So we're supposed to be learning an identity or sense of self. And so you have an integrated sense of who you are as a person. And you learn this through your interaction with your caregiver. Also, boundaries and a sense of separateness between self and others. So infants, when they come into the world, don't have that sense of separateness from others. They don't know that they and their caregiver are two different people, but that sense of separateness develops during toddler years, and when they start to kind of separate and individuate when they're like starting around 1.5, 2 years old. So this develops with healthy attachment styles, and those boundaries, those with poor boundaries, tend to allow others to intrude upon them, or they intrude upon others. Okay, here's a slide that kind of depicts that, but I guess you can't see, well, you can't see whatever's up there. Anyway, is this the line you were telling me not to cross? And then how does this girl feel when he crosses the line? Pretty angry. Anger often comes from having our boundaries violated. I know that for me personally, as a second generation adult former cult member, anger was a big part of what I felt when I left the cult. And I think that it was because my boundaries had been so consistently violated. And it took me a while to get over that anger, because I had to learn how to set the boundaries. You know, we come from an environment where there's no boundaries, and we don't know how to set those boundaries. You've got to learn how to set the boundaries, so to deal with the anger, so so that your boundaries are no longer violated. Okay, so normal childhood development also helps with affect, emotional regulation. Those of us who were born and raised in cults, people who did not experience healthy child development, are likely to be struggling with depression and anxiety. We're unable to deal with things that might be minor stresses in our life without becoming, incredibly anxious or very depressed. And often these feelings, these strong emotions, are acted out in a negative way, in ways that are self-destructive or destructive to those around us. So I'm going to talk about the insecure attachment patterns next. And there's 3 main ones. There's the avoidant attachment pattern, the anxious or ambivalent attachment pattern, and then disorganized. We're going to start with avoidant. With the avoidant attachment pattern, the caregiver is emotionally unavailable and is not perceptive of the child's needs and does not respond to the child's needs. Often the caregiver is rejecting. So an example of this would be, you have a hungry baby who's crying, and the caregiver initially feels irritated by it, doesn't want to respond, so ignores it. And eventually the caregiver decides to get up and do something about it, but does not perceive that the child is crying because he or she is hungry. Instead, will change the child's diaper. Child continues to cry. The caregiver thinks maybe child needs a nap, tries to put the child to bed. It doesn't work. And then maybe an hour and a half later, the caregiver finally decides, okay, I'll try to feed the child. So in this situation, the caregiver is not responding to the child's needs, is not understanding the child. The child doesn't feel connected emotionally, and in the future will try to avoid emotional connections in order to try to avoid being rejected. And this kind of person is the type that will often try to be fiercely self-reliant. This person doesn't trust others to meet their needs, and they're the one who wants to do everything for themselves. I mean, how many of us here as little kids were taking care of a lot of things for ourselves that parents otherwise would? Like I know that I've heard of other kids enrolling themselves in school. I mean, I did the same thing. I went to the high school myself and told them I wanted to go to school because the cult, in the cult I wasn't supposed to be in high school. Kids take, and I felt like, in our cult, that us kids were really kind of on our own, taking care of ourselves. And sometimes the children feel like they're more responsible than the adults. So this type of person ends up feeling disconnected from others. And sometimes they feel disconnected from their own needs as well. When your caregiver consistently ignores your needs, you learn to ignore your needs as well. And this is the kind of adult that comes out of this situation. She didn't know who would stay or leave, so she pushed them all away. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay, let's talk about another one of the pathological attachment patterns. This is the anxious or ambivalent attachment pattern. So in this attachment pattern, the caregiver is inconsistently available, perceptive, and responsive. So sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. They often are preoccupied, and the caregiver's response might be inappropriate to the child and might be experienced as intrusive by the child because it's inappropriate. The caregiver is anxious often and insecure about their own ability to respond to a child. So an example of this might be you have a child who's hungry and cries, and so the caregiver hears it, knows he or she has to respond, but feels really anxious about their ability to respond appropriately. So maybe they start getting a bottle and they're thinking in their head, well, I don't know if this is what she really wants, but I'll try, whatever. The child picks up on this insecurity, this anxiety, and responds to it. The child will respond by internalizing the anxiety of the caregiver. The child becomes hypervigilant, seeks safety by staying close to the caregiver, but doesn't necessarily get comforted by it. And this kind of child is going to have a hard time learning how to self-soothe. And this is so, and then as far as the person who's raised with this kind of attachment pattern, the kind of relationship patterns they're going to have are, they're going to be anxious about entering romantic relationships and friendships. They'll feel that they can't be loved by others, and they may become over dependent in a relationship. They may develop like a really enmeshed relationship. They'll either be withdrawn or they'll have excessive attempts to connect. They have emotional roller coasters and are quick to feel jealous or abandoned. This is kind of what you get: the I love you, I hate you, I need you, go away, I can't live without you, I don't need you, don't go, get out of my life. It's just kind of this kind of constant tug of war between the different emotions. Okay, so this is the last of the pathological attachment patterns. And this one, so caregivers who demonstrate this attachment pattern will often alternate between, well, they'll be mostly in one of the other two attachment patterns, and then sometimes they'll demonstrate this attachment pattern. So this attachment pattern is just straight up abusive. So this is the caregiver who is frightening, disorienting, alarming, terrifying, and just abusive. So for example, this would be the caregiver who the hungry child is crying, and the caregiver screams at the child, "Shut up." And now the child is both scared and hungry. And after a while, and then the child cries louder, and after a while the caregiver gets up, but they're mad at the child, and perhaps they grab them too hard, they hurt the child cries more. So they're abusive. So, and a child in this situation is stuck between two impulses. So they have a natural reaction to want to flee the source of the terror and to seek comfort. Well, but then they want to seek comfort, and the person they want to seek comfort from is the caregiver. So they're simultaneously trying to flee from the caregiver and seek comfort from the caregiver. So the attachment pattern becomes very disorganized and chaotic as they simultaneously approach and avoid the caregiver. Children in this situation are likely to freeze, to dissociate from the situation because it's too scary, too terrifying. And they're likely to not develop a strong sense of self. And the adult relationship patterns for this type of person, so for someone who is raised in this kind of environment, they're going to have disorganized relationships. They're going to be afraid of closeness. They're going to simultaneously approach and avoid potential partners. They'll feel desperate but show indifference, and they might be prone to self-injury and addiction, and they're more likely to find themselves in abusive relationships where there's domestic violence, and they'll have trouble with depression and anxiety. Okay, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about special challenges for those who were raised in cults. So first of all, identity, okay? I think I know that identity is a huge struggle for those of us who were born and raised in cults. When we were children, the cults did not allow us to develop our own identity. It imposed an identity on us. And so when we leave a cult, our entire identity, everything that we thought we were, is stripped away from us. And it can feel like you have this giant void, you can feel hollowed out as though there's nothing left. And unlike first generation former cult members, there's no pre-cult identity for us to return to. So we have the daunting task of needing to create an identity for ourselves as adults. So this is very difficult, and there's like no guides for this. How do you create an identity for yourself as an adult? So I listed out some things that I think help. I think that it really helps to find yourself a community of people who've had similar experiences and can relate to what you have experienced. It's that experience of being able to talk to somebody who understands what you've been through and have your feelings validated. That is so important for your sense of identity. Taking control of the narrative of your life is really important. So when I was in the cult, I was fed a story about how my life had played out. The story was that my mother had met this amazing God person, God manifest or Messiah type person in India, and had taken me to his paradise in India. That was the story. And the story was that I was a bad person and I should have been grateful for this beautiful gift that had been given to me. And instead I hated it and left. Well, I had to take the narrative. I had to take control of that. That was the narrative that was fed to relatives, friends, everybody who I associated with. I had to take control of that narrative, turn it around to the way that I really experienced it, which was completely different. What I experienced was an abusive cult leader, my mother being absorbed with this abusive person and being negligent of my needs, and having my well-being sacrificed for the cult. So how do you take control of the narrative of your life? Well, for me, I did it through writing a blog. Writing that blog, having people read it, and then reflect back to me that, yeah, that was really horrible. I can't believe you survived that. That was so important to me. Now, other people have other means of doing the same thing. I know that a lot of people do it through art, through other creative outlets, filmmaking. A friend of mine, actually somebody from my cult, one of the other second generation adult former cult members, created a documentary about the film, and about the cult. And I think the film was his way of taking control of the identity of his life, saying, no, this wasn't paradise. Actually, there was something really horrible going on for us kids. So you need to do that. And then it's so important to have other people reflect back to you that, yeah, that was really awful. It's like you're creating that sense of attunement, the attunement with the caregiver being in tune to the child's needs and reflecting, yeah, I see you're angry right now. Let's figure out what's going on, why you're angry. It's the same thing. Like other people need to reflect back to you. Yeah, that was really horrible. That was scary. That was awful. And reflect back to you, you're so strong for having survived that. So, and when you do this, it also creates a cohesive account of your life. I know that my account of my life was so disjointed when I left the cult because I had to lie about so much of what was going on. That was one of kind of our cult philosophies or ideologies, is that we could not tell other people anything about what we were doing in the cult. So I would be in America sometimes, and then I would disappear. I'd go to India, and I couldn't tell people what I was doing there. So some people I couldn't even tell I was going to India. Sometimes for some people, we told them that we were going to Europe or somewhere else, and we'd create stories about what we were doing. Like at one point I was seeing a doctor in Europe for my spine. Apparently I had scoliosis so bad that that the only specialist who could treat it was in England. Of course, that was a lie. I don't have scoliosis. But anyway, that's kind of lies. But anyway, but that just created a lot of disjointedness in my life. I had to create a cohesive account, connect all the dots and create one cohesive account of my life. So those are things that helped me a whole lot. So, all right, boundaries. Okay, so I've talked about boundaries before. Cults are a boundaryless society. We are not allowed boundaries of any sort in a cult. You have no rights. You never have the right to say no to anybody about anything. What the cult leader wants is going to be what he gets, and you have no say in the matter. So we are going to grow up without boundaries, and we're going to be more likely to let other people take advantage of us and pressure us into things that we don't want. So to pressure and to do things that are harmful to us. So things that help is one thing. So things that have helped me. So I created a clear written statement for myself about things that I will and won't accept. So I have, I had it written out. It was clear as day. And if something came up that was on my list of things that I don't accept, it was a no-go. I'm like, no, that's not going to work. And you also have to understand that you have the absolute right to say no in any situation, because people who are trying to pressure you into something will act as though they have a right to your yes, but it's just not true. And they'll ask you to explain yourself when you say no. Like, So why don't you want this? Why won't you do this? Why are you, pushing me away? And they don't need an explanation. No is a complete sentence. No means no. And you have an absolute right, and they do not deserve or need any explanation from you. No stands by itself. And when you aren't sure, so sometimes people ask you about things and you're like, you don't know, just say no. It's okay. That's okay. You know what? If you change your mind later, you can always come back and say yes later, but just say no. And you never have to explain your no. Okay, so depression, anxiety, anger. Oh yeah, so those of us born and raised in cults are likely to experience these things. And because there wasn't a reliable, responsive, attuned, caring parent during early childhood, we learned that our needs don't matter, and our needs are too much. Our needs are more than anybody else can handle. We're not important. That's what we learn. Of course, it's not true. We don't learn how to self-soothe, and we learn despair. We learn that there's no hope. Our boundaries have been consistently violated, which makes us feel angry. So things that help: psychotherapy. Find yourself a good therapist who, especially somebody who's familiar with cults and knows how to work with people who have survived cults, particularly second generation adult former members. Medication. Don't be afraid to resort to medicine. Medicine can help a lot with depression and anxiety. Self-care. When you're depressed, the last thing you want to do is take care of yourself, but do not allow that impulse to take hold. You have to continue to take care of yourself. Pretend that this is one way I help myself. Pretend that you are your own loving parent. And I will, because I am my own loving parent, I'm taking care of you like I take care of myself like I would a child. I will continue to feed you, to groom you, make sure you get enough sleep, make sure you get enough exercise, make sure you get healthy food. Continue to do that. You must do that. And then work on development of boundaries. Problems with relationships. So yes, we are likely to have problems with relationships. When we do not form secure attachments in childhood, we're going to struggle here. So let me just explain a little bit. When you leave the cult, you leave and you're feeling hollowed out inside. It's that lack of identity that I've talked about. So there's no identity, no internal framework, no internal sense of reference. So often, this is what I found myself doing, is looking to others to fill this giant void that was inside of me. Okay, but healthy people don't want to fill a void within another person, okay? So healthy, whole individuals are looking for other healthy, whole individuals to have a relationship with. The only type of person who's going to be interested in filling a void inside of you is going to be another abuser. So a narcissist or somebody who's like a sociopath. Those people will be happy to help you create another identity, to impose another identity on you and to control you. But those are abusers. We don't want those ultimately. So we have to work on ourselves and rebuild that identity before we can really have a healthy relationship. So, and our lack of boundaries means that we get advantage of. But again, we can build those boundaries. So we didn't see healthy relationships modeled in the cult. So we have a hard time understanding how to create that in our lives. I mean, we witnessed an abusive relationship between the cult leader and our parents. Our parents probably didn't have a good relationship because the cult interfered. So we didn't see that modeled. Most people model their own relationships after their parents. We didn't learn good communication skills, and communication skills are so important, just an integral ingredient for relationships. So what do you do to help with this? Well, you gotta develop that identity. Got to, and work on your boundaries as well. And I do, of course, recommend psychotherapy and couples counseling. Make sure that you find another person who is open to the possibility of counseling. Okay, so I know I've talked a lot about things that we struggle with, but you know what? We can get better. I don't want to leave you feeling as though we have all these problems and there's no hope. Things can get better for sure. I mean, I think I'm a shining example of that. I've got a great career. I've got a great husband. I've got a great 4 great kids. So things get better. It's not all hopeless. So how do you get better though? So I support seeing a psychotherapist, somebody with knowledge of cults, and possibly somebody who's worked with a second or multi-generational former cult member before. Self-care is important, as I mentioned before. I do support connecting with others who were raised in cults, joining a support group, and then expressing yourself through creative outlets like writing, art, music, poetry, filmmaking. And just remember, attachment strategies are changeable. Through nurturing relationships, we can develop an earned security attachment status. So we can get better. All right. So that is all. And once again, I thank you all for joining me today. And I hope that I wish you all the best on your healing journey. And I hope that you learned something from the presentation.